My name is Judith, and I'm 56 years old. I trusted my parents with the $300,000 my grandmother left me. They said they were just keeping it safe until the attorney showed me 20 withdrawals, all signed in my name. That's when I realized they hadn't protected my inheritance. They'd stolen it. When I look back now, I realize the day my grandmother Agnes died wasn't just the day I lost her. It was the day I unknowingly lost my trust in my parents, too. My grandmother and I were inseparable. Growing up, she was the one who came to my school plays, who taught me how to bake, who sat with me through breakups and heartbreaks. She used to pat my hand and say, "Judith, one day I'll make sure you're taken care of." I always brushed it off, telling her she already did more than enough. I didn't know those words would echo years later in a way I could never have predicted. Agnes was the kind of woman who didn't flaunt her wealth. You wouldn't know by looking at her cozy little house filled with crocheted blankets and old furniture that she had a lifetime of savings tucked away, smart investments, a pension, and property she'd managed with care. She believed in preparation, not indulgence. That's why, when she passed, I wasn't surprised to hear she'd left behind a will. It was just like her, thoughtful and organized to the very end. What did surprise me was how quickly my parents, Harold and Denise, took control of everything. They insisted they'd handle the estate matters. They said things like, "You shouldn't have to deal with paperwork right now, honey. You've been through enough." I was deep in grief, so their offer sounded like love. I didn't realize it was the first step in a carefully crafted deception. When the time came for the reading of the will, my parents told me not to attend. They said it would only reopen wounds, and that the attorney could communicate everything through them. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that day, clutching one of Grandma's old teacups, trying to convince myself that they were right, that avoiding the meeting was for my emotional well-being. A week later, they came by the house looking somber, but oddly relieved. Adieu, my father said, "Judith, your grandmother left you something generous, $300,000. But it's best if we hold on to it for a while, just to make sure it's managed properly. You're still grieving, and these things can get complicated." At that moment, I didn't even question it. I was touched. I thought, they're trying to protect me. I nodded and thanked them, trusting every word. They were my parents, after all. They'd never given me a reason to doubt them before. But as months went by, things didn't add up. My parents started a kitchen remodel, and I remember my mother proudly showing me photos of their villa rental, laughing as she told me how Harold finally got to taste real gelato. I asked where all the money came from, and she casually said, "Oh, we dipped into our savings. We deserve to enjoy life a little." It sounded harmless at first. My parents had always been careful with money. Maybe they'd been saving for years. Still, a small voice in my head whispered that something wasn't right. My father had complained about medical bills just a few months before. My mother had mentioned they were thinking of downsizing, and yet suddenly they were living as if they'd won the lottery. I brushed off my doubts, convincing myself that I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious. But that illusion shattered one morning when I opened my mailbox. Inside was a thin envelope from a law firm. The name on it, Goldstein and Associates, meant nothing to me. I tore it open, expecting maybe a thank you note or estate update. Instead, it was a letter addressed directly to me. "Dear Ms. Harris, we're reaching out regarding the final distribution of the estate of Ms. Agnes Fairchild. Please sign and return the attached confirmation of funds receipt at your earliest convenience." Attached was a form with my name printed neatly across the top, but something stopped me cold. Beneath the section labeled Account Balance Confirmation, the figure listed was $62,118.77. I froze. That wasn't the $300,000 my parents had told me about. It wasn't even close. My chest tightened as I reread the line over and over, hoping I was misinterpreting it, but the number didn't change. 62,418.77. I sat at my dining table, my hands trembling as I stared at that paper. 1,000 questions crashed through my mind at once. Was this a mistake? Had my parents misunderstood something? Or was there something far darker happening, something I wasn't supposed to see? For the first time, I didn't feel like a grieving daughter. I felt like a fool. That night, I tucked the letter into my desk drawer and tried to sleep, but my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. My parents' expensive vacations, their new car, their sudden generosity with gifts, it all started to make horrifying sense. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head like a haunting whisper, "I'll make sure you're taken care of." And suddenly, I wasn't sure she had been talking about comfort. Maybe she'd meant protection. Because as I lay there in the dark, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. My parents were protecting something, yes, but it wasn't me. The letter mentioned an account balance that didn't match what my parents had told me. That letter cracked open a truth I wasn't prepared to face. For 2 days, I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. A simple clerical mistake, a miscommunication. I even rehearsed what I'd say before I picked up the phone. When I finally called my parents, my voice shook more than I expected. "Mom, I got a letter from an ABR attorney. Something about Grandma's estate," I said carefully. "It mentioned an account balance that doesn't match what you told me." There was silence for a few seconds, long enough for my heart to start pounding. Then my mother's voice came through, sharp and uneasy. "Oh, Judith, that man doesn't know what he's doing. He's been confused from the start. I told him we were handling things privately." Privately. That word hit me wrong. Before I could respond, my father's voice joined in from the background. "Judith, everything's fine. The money is in a protected account. It's gaining interest. You don't need to worry about the numbers yet." Protected account. Gaining interest. Words that sounded legitimate but meant absolutely nothing. I asked if I could see the account statements for my own records. My mother snapped, "Don't you trust us, after everything we've done for you?" Her tone stung. I immediately felt guilty, as if I'd done something wrong by asking about my own inheritance. Still, something inside me shifted that day. The unease wouldn't go away. Their explanations felt rehearsed, too quick, too defensive. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was sitting just out of reach, waiting for me to stop pretending. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again with the letter spread out in front of me. I traced the words with my finger like they might reveal a secret. The firm's address was printed neatly at the bottom, Goldstein and Associates, downtown. Without thinking twice, I decided I'd go there in person. The next morning, I drove into the city. My palms were sweaty against the steering wheel the entire way. The law office was tucked inside an old brick building, respectable, understated, the kind of place my grandmother would have chosen. Inside, I met Mr. Goldstein, a man in his early 60s with kind eyes and the sort of patience that only comes from decades of watching families tear each other apart over money. When I introduced myself and explained why I was there, his expression changed. "Ms. Harris," he said slowly, "you mean you weren't present during any of the estate discussions?" I frowned. "No, my parents said they were taking care of it. They told me I'd get the inheritance when everything was finalized." He sat back, visibly surprised. "That's unusual. Your grandmother's will was quite clear. You were to have full access to your funds immediately after probate. There were no restrictions or trustees assigned. You were the sole beneficiary." The words felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I asked to see the will, and he slid a copy across the desk. My grandmother's handwriting appeared on the final page, her signature familiar and steady, a final reminder of her trust in me. Then he turned to his computer, typing quickly. "We processed several distributions over the past year. According to the records, all withdrawals were authorized by you." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean, authorized by me?" He pulled out a folder and placed several papers in front of me. There, in black ink, was my name, my signature, on withdrawal slips and authorization forms I had never seen before. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my hands trembled as I picked up one of the papers. The handwriting was similar to mine, but not quite. The J's was looped too high. The H in Harris was slanted the wrong way. Whoever had signed these had practiced. "I didn't sign these," I whispered. Mr. Goldstein's expression turned grim. "Then someone else did." My stomach dropped. My own parents were the only ones who could have had access to those documents. I felt dizzy, like the ground was slipping from under me. He leaned forward gently. "Ms. Harris, I'll need to review the transaction history in detail, but I want to ask you something. Please don't mention this to your parents yet. If they forged your signature, confronting them now could make things worse. Let me do some digging first." I nodded slowly, numb. My trust, The trust I had always taken for granted was starting to crumble into dust. When I got home, I pulled out an old photo album and sat on my couch for hours. Page after page of smiling faces stared back at me. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family barbecues, my mother holding me as a baby, my father teaching me how to ride a bike. They looked like good people, decent people, my people. When did they change? When did money start mattering more than their daughter? I pressed my fingers against one of the pictures, the one where Grandma Agnes was holding both my hands, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. She'd trusted them too. Maybe that was her final mistake. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every conversation I'd ever had with my parents about money, every strange pause, every excuse. I knew Mr. Goldstein would call me soon, and part of me already feared what he might say. The call came the next morning. "Judith." His voice was steady but grave. "I've reviewed the withdrawals. There were more than 20 transactions. They totaled just under $240,000. My breath caught in my throat. He paused before adding quietly, "And all of them were made under your name?" Mr. Goldstein called back with proof. Over 20 withdrawals totaling nearly $240,000. I thought betrayal hurt, until I saw my own handwriting faked across bank documents. The morning after Mr. Goldstein's call, he emailed me a folder titled Transaction Records. My hands shook as I opened it. Page after page appeared on my screen: withdrawal slips, authorization forms, wire transfer requests, each one neatly stamped with the estate's seal, and at the bottom of every page, in blue ink, was my name. My signature. At least, that's what it looked like. The curves of the letters were mine, familiar, almost intimate, but something was off. The J in Judith was too wide. The H in Harris didn't have the small upward hook I'd always made. Whoever had signed these had studied my handwriting carefully, probably from old greeting cards or checks I'd written to them over the years. The realization made me sick. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd become me to do it. I printed a few pages and sat in silence for nearly an hour, staring at the evidence. The clock ticked loud against the wall, a cruel reminder that the longer I sat there, the more time they had to cover their tracks. I finally grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When my mother opened the door, she smiled like nothing was wrong. "Judith, you didn't say you were coming." I didn't smile back. "We need to talk." We sat in the living room, the same one I'd spent countless Christmas mornings in. It smelled like cinnamon candles and betrayal. My father was reading the newspaper, pretending to be relaxed, but I saw his eyes flicker when he noticed the folder in my hand. I placed the papers on the coffee table and slid them toward him. "Explain these." My mother looked down at them, her face draining of color. My father slowly set the newspaper aside, glancing over the pages without touching them. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then my mother cleared her throat. "Judith, honey, we didn't steal from you," she said softly, like she was talking to a frightened child. "We were protecting your money. We just borrowed some for investments." "Investments?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "You forged my signature 20 times for investments?" My father straightened in his chair, defensive. "We didn't forge anything. We acted on your behalf. It's still your money, or at least it was. The market took a turn, and we lost some value. It wasn't our fault." The words hit me like a punch. Lost value, as if that made it better. I demanded to see the investment records, the statements, the portfolios, anything to prove what they were saying. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. My mother looked away, fiddling with her wedding ring. Neither said a word. "You don't have any, do you?" I whispered. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the papers flutter. "You're being ungrateful, Judith. We raised you, supported you, gave you everything. Now you're accusing us of crimes? Families don't need contracts. We do things out of love." Love. The word sounded filthy coming from his mouth. I stood up, tears burning in my eyes. "You don't get to call it love when you steal from me." My mother started crying, saying, "We were going to pay you back when things got better." I shook my head slowly. "No, you weren't. You were never planning to." The air in the room felt suffocating. I looked around at the house, the polished wood floors, the new flat-screen TV, the designer furniture that hadn't been there a year ago. My inheritance was everywhere I looked, woven into their comfort. Without another word, I picked up the papers and walked out. My father yelled after me, but I didn't turn around. By the time I reached my car, I could barely breathe. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I felt like an orphan, not by death, but by choice. The people who brought me into the world had erased me from their conscience for money. That night, I called Mr. Goldstein and told him everything. He listened quietly, his voice calm but firm when I finished. "Judith, I'm sorry," he said. "At this point, we need solid proof of intent. I recommend hiring a forensic accountant. They can trace where the funds went, even if your parents tried to cover their tracks." I agreed, even though my voice trembled when I said yes. After hanging up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I could still hear my father's voice echoing in my head. Family doesn't need contracts. But he was wrong. Families that love each other don't need contracts. Families that betray you absolutely do. I whispered to myself, they didn't just steal money, they stole my trust. The next day, I met with the forensic accountant Mr. Goldstein recommended, a woman named Marla Davis, sharp and meticulous. She promised she'd start digging immediately. A few days later, she called me with a quiet edge in her voice. "Judith, I think we found something. The transactions aren't gone. They're traceable." My heart skipped. "Traceable where?" There was a pause before she answered. "To a joint account," she said slowly, "in the names of Harold and Denise Harris." The accountant's initial findings hinted the funds were still traceable, but in my parents' joint account. Every paper trail told a story, and theirs was written in deceit. The day after Marla's call, she invited me to her office to review the findings. I remember the sterile smell of coffee and printer ink as I sat beside her desk, my hands cold against the folder she slid toward me. She'd labeled it simply, Harris Estate Audit. Inside were color-coded spreadsheets, transaction logs, and screenshots from my parents' online banking history. I stared at the rows of numbers, my grandmother's legacy reduced to columns of theft. Marla pointed to the first page. "Here's where it started," she said, tracing her pen across a timeline. 3 days after the inheritance funds were deposited, a $25,000 transfer was made to your parents' joint savings. That pattern repeated every few weeks, smaller amounts, staggered just enough to avoid detection. I swallowed hard. "How much in total?" She flipped to the IRS summary sheet. $243,600, all transferred over the course of 8 months. It was one thing to suspect they'd stolen from me. It was another to see it confirmed, line by line, in black and white. "They were careful," Marla continued. "They didn't take it all at once. That's what makes it premeditated. They knew what they were doing." I stared at the numbers until my vision blurred. My parents' new car, the Italian vacation, the marble countertops in their kitchen. It all made sense now. Every purchase, every smile, every lie disguised as generosity, funded by the money my grandmother had left for me. Marla tapped another page. "We also recovered login records from the bank. All the online transfers were made from the same IP address, your parents' home network." I blinked. "You mean they didn't even try to hide it?" She sighed. "People like this rarely think they'll get caught, especially when it's family." I sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the documents. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part just wanted to cry. But instead, I felt calm. A strange, heavy calm. The kind that comes when grief burns down to cold determination. "I want justice," I said finally. Marla nodded. "Then you'll need to move forward legally. Mr. Goldstein will handle that." When I left her office, the winter wind bit at my face, sharp and cleansing. For the first time in months, I had direction. Mr. Goldstein was waiting for me when I arrived at his office that afternoon. I laid Marla's report on his desk. He skimmed the first few pages, his brow tightening. "This is solid," he said quietly. "Very solid. With this evidence, we can file a civil claim for restitution and potentially criminal charges for forgery and fraud." The words criminal charges made my stomach twist. My parents weren't strangers. They were the people who'd tucked me into bed, cheered at my graduation, walked me down the aisle at my wedding. Suing them felt unthinkable. I don't know if I can do that, I whispered. They're still my parents. Mr. Goldstein leaned back in his chair. Judith, they stopped being your parents the moment they stole your inheritance. You can't keep giving them power over you. I didn't answer. My mind was a storm. Guilt, anger, sadness, disbelief. I left his office and sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at nothing. That night I called my younger sister Ruth. She'd moved 3 states away years ago after clashing with our parents about money, and now I understood why. When I told her everything, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, Judith, you have to do it. They crossed a line. Blood doesn't excuse theft. Her words hit hard. Ruth had always been braver than me. I realized she was right. Doing nothing would only let them rewrite the story, turning me into the villain. I called Mr. Goldstein the next morning. My voice was steadier this time. File it, I said. He didn't hesitate. Understood. I'll prepare the legal notice immediately. Over the next few days, we finalized every detail. Statements, signatures, court filings. Each document felt like another weight lifted off my chest. For the first time since my grandmother's death, I was reclaiming control of my life. Still, late at night, guilt crept in. I kept wondering what Grandma Agnes would think if she saw all this, her daughter and son-in-law stealing from her granddaughter. The thought made me nauseous. I prayed that somewhere she understood this wasn't revenge, it was survival. 2 weeks later, everything was ready. The papers were printed, signed, and sealed. Mr. Goldstein planned to have them served to my parents' address by noon the next day. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the moment they'd realize what was happening, the knock on the door, the shock on their faces, the panic. Part of me dreaded it, but another part knew it had to happen. The next morning, I sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street, waiting for Mr. Goldstein's call to confirm the delivery. Hours passed. Then, just before lunchtime, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. There they were, my parents, standing on my porch, smiling, as if everything were fine. My mother held a bouquet of lilies. My father wore that same calm expression he always used when he wanted to manipulate me into forgiving him. Judith, my mother said sweetly, we thought we'd stop by for a little visit. The flowers trembled in her hands, as if they were as nervous as she was. Before the papers could be served, my parents showed up at my doorstep, smiling, holding flowers. They didn't come to apologize. They came to manipulate. When I opened the door and saw them standing there, flowers in hand, I almost laughed. The timing was too perfect. Less than 24 hours before they were about to be served with legal papers, my parents had suddenly remembered how to play the part of loving family. Judith, my mother began softly, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. We know you're upset. We've been thinking about you nonstop. We just want to make peace. Her eyes glistened with tears, a performance I'd seen before. My father stood behind her, his hands clasped around a gift bag like he was making a peace offering. The scene looked almost wholesome, if I hadn't known the truth. I stepped aside, my heartbeat steady but cold. Come in, I said flatly. They sat on the couch, carefully arranging their expressions into something between guilt and affection. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting for them to get to the point. My father sighed heavily, shaking his head as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Judith, you've been listening to the wrong people, he said. This whole thing with the attorney and accountant, it's a misunderstanding. We've been managing the money for your benefit. There are some predatory relatives who would have gone after it if we didn't act fast. I wanted to laugh in his face. Predatory relatives? I asked quietly. You mean the ones who don't exist? He ignored the question. My mother placed a manila folder on the coffee table and slid it toward me. Here, she said. This is the family trust. Everything is still in your name, sweetheart. We just move things around to protect it. I opened the folder slowly, pretending to be curious. Inside was a stack of neatly printed pages labeled Family Heritage Trust Agreement. The font looked strangely familiar. I pulled out my phone, typed a line from the document into Google. And there it was. A generic legal template, free to download. My parents had faked a trust. They didn't even have the decency to hire someone to make it look legitimate. I looked up at them and smiled faintly, forcing calm into my voice. "This is impressive," I said. "You really thought of everything." My mother visibly relaxed, mistaking my restraint for forgiveness. "See," she said eagerly, "we're not the bad guys. We were only protecting you." Inside, my anger burned hotter than ever. I wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the room, to demand they stop pretending. But instead, I slipped my phone out of my pocket, setting it discreetly on the arm of the chair. I pressed record. "Tell me again," I said slowly, "how you were protecting me." My father took the bait. "We didn't steal anything, Judith," he said, leaning forward. "We used some of the funds, yes, but it was for investments. You'll thank us one day when you're not broke." That word again, thank. As if I should be grateful they'd stolen my future. I nodded slowly, keeping my tone calm. "And you transferred the money yourselves?" He shrugged. "Of course. Who else would?" My mother chimed in. "We only moved it around. It's still in the family. That's what matters." My fingers clenched tightly around the edge of the table to keep from shaking. I wanted to believe this was some cruel test, some moral lesson, but it wasn't. This was who they were now. I played along for another 15 minutes, asking harmless questions while the recorder captured every damning word. My father boasted about managing family wealth. My mother spoke about timing the market. And I sat there, smiling like a fool, nodding as if I believed them. When they finally left, my mother hugged me tightly at the door. "We're family, Judith," she whispered. "Don't let outsiders come between us." I stood frozen as they walked down the driveway, waving like parents who'd just made amends with their daughter. When the door closed, I let out a trembling breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I played back the recording. Hearing their voices on that tiny speaker made my stomach twist. Calm, confident, completely unrepentant. They admitted to using the funds. My father even laughed at one point, saying, "We didn't steal, we repurposed. That's what smart people do." By the time the recording ended, my decision was final. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was ready. That night I sent the file to Mr. Goldstein. Within minutes, he replied, "Mr. Goldstein, this is exactly what we needed. Don't contact them again. We'll move forward with full prosecution. Great work, Judith." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at his message until the screen went dark. Great work. Those words felt strange. Nothing about this felt like a victory. It felt like surviving a storm you never wanted to be in. As I set my phone down, I tried to feel relief, but all I could think about was my grandmother. If she were alive, she'd never believe her daughter could do this. Maybe that was why she left everything to me, because deep down, she already knew. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I tossed and turned until the first hint of dawn slipped through the blinds. Just as I began to drift off, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Mr. Goldstein. The time was 6:42 a.m. "Judith," he said urgently the moment I answered, "you need to check your parents' accounts immediately. The bank notified me this morning. The remaining $60,000 was withdrawn overnight." I sat upright in bed, heart pounding. "What do you mean withdrawn?" He hesitated before answering. "They cleaned it out. Every last dollar." The next morning, I received an urgent call. My parents had emptied the remaining $60,000 overnight. They thought they could outrun the law, but truth travels faster. The morning after Mr. Goldstein's call, everything moved at lightning speed. He and Marla filed an emergency injunction before the banks even opened, citing evidence of fraud, forgery, and unauthorized withdrawals. By noon, a judge had approved the request, freezing every account linked to my parents' names. For the first time in months, I felt something close to control. They couldn't touch another dime. By late afternoon, my parents were officially served with the legal papers. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the shock on their faces when the doorbell rang. Expecting a friendly neighbor, only to be handed documents that spelled out their betrayal in cold legal language. It didn't take long for the phone calls to start. First came my mother. Her voice was high-pitched and trembling, somewhere between rage and desperation. "Judith, what have you done?" she cried. "You can't do this to your own parents. You're destroying us." I stayed silent for a moment before replying, "You did that yourselves, Mom." She sobbed, the kind of cry that used to make me rush to comfort her. This time, it felt hollow. We were just trying to manage things. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, just drop the case before it's too late. I hung up. A few hours later, my father called. His tone was the complete opposite, calm, deliberate, dripping with authority. "You're embarrassing the family," he said coldly. "You want to sue your own parents? Go ahead, but don't expect to be part of this family anymore. You'll be disowned, publicly." I took a deep breath. "Then disown me," I said, and ended the call. When I set the phone down, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from finality. That moment felt like a line drawn in the sand. I wasn't their naive daughter anymore. I was a woman fighting for justice, even if it meant standing alone. By the next morning, the family group chats lit up. Someone, probably my mother, had started spreading her version of the story. Suddenly, cousins and distant relatives were texting me, asking what was going on. I didn't reply to most of them, but a few calls made it clear what my parents were telling people. "They said you're confused," one cousin said hesitantly, "that you're under bad legal advice, that you're unstable." I almost laughed. "Unstable?" I repeated. "That's creative." Word traveled fast. Within a few days, nearly everyone in the family knew about the lawsuit. My parents had spent years cultivating their image. Perfect marriage, respected neighbors, pillars of the community. Watching that facade crack was the only justice I'd had so far. Mr. Goldstein called me later that week. "They've hired an attorney," he said. "A man named Paul Denton, old school defense type. He's trying to frame this as a family misunderstanding." I scoffed. "A misunderstanding that cost $300,000? He's claiming the withdrawals were made with your consent." My stomach twisted. "My consent? That's impossible." "I know," he said calmly, "but this is how they'll play it. They'll paint you as emotionally unstable after your grandmother's death. Suggest you gave them permission and forgot." It was the same strategy I'd seen my parents use all my life: deny, deflect, and discredit. They'd twist the truth until it bent in their favor. The court date was set within 2 weeks. When I walked into the courthouse, my heart felt like it was pounding in my ears. The air was heavy, sterile, filled with echoes of people fighting over things that once meant love. My parents sat across the room, perfectly dressed, their expressions carefully composed. My mother wore pearls. My father had that same authoritative posture that always made him look unshakable. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize them. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began quietly: introductions, evidence lists, procedural remarks. But when my parents' attorney started speaking, my jaw clenched. "Your Honor," Denton began smoothly, "this case is a tragic misunderstanding between family members. My clients, Harold and Denise Harris, have acted only in their daughter's best interest. The funds in question were handled with her verbal consent. They believed they were assisting her in managing assets responsibly after her grandmother's passing." He paused dramatically, letting the words sink in. "Unfortunately, due to emotional distress and outside influence, Ms. Harris now claims she was deceived." My fist tightened in my lap. Outside influence. That was his polite way of saying a woman manipulated by her own grief. Mr. Goldstein rose to respond. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. "Your Honor, the defense claims consent. Yet, as you'll see in our evidence, Ms. Harris never signed or authorized a single withdrawal. Every signature presented was forged." The judge looked up from her notes. "Forged?" "Yes, Your Honor. We have expert analysis confirming this, as well as bank video evidence of who made those transactions." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My parents shifted in their seats. For the first time, I saw fear. Small, fleeting, but real. Still, Denton didn't back down. "We maintain that Ms. Harris was aware of these transfers and is now misremembering events." The judge leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "I'll need to see the supposed consent forms the defense is referring to," she said. Denton nodded smoothly. "Of course, Your Honor. We'll present them at the next session." Mr. Goldstein looked at me with quiet confidence. "They're bluffing," he whispered. "There are no consent forms." Maybe he was right, but the way my father stared straight ahead, stone-faced, made me wonder if he had another lie waiting to unfold. The judge paused proceedings, requesting verification of my supposed consent forms. I braced myself as Mr. Goldstein stood up, holding the proof that would change everything. The courtroom felt colder that morning. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and the air was thick with tension. My palms were damp against the table, and I could hear the faint rustle of paper as Mr. Goldstein organized his files. Across from me sat my parents, or rather, the two people who used to be my parents, dressed neatly, faces still but strained. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Goldstein, you may present your evidence." He nodded and opened a thick folder labeled Exhibit D. His movements were slow, deliberate, commanding attention with every turn of a page. Then he spoke, calm, measured, but with an edge of certainty that made my pulse quicken. "Your Honor, the defense claims my client gave consent for these withdrawals," he began. "Today, we will demonstrate beyond doubt that those claims are false." He held up the first set of documents, enlarged copies of withdrawal slips projected onto the screen at the front of the courtroom. My name stretched across each one in blue ink. "This," Mr. Goldstein said, "is what the defense calls Ms. Harris's signature." Then he clicked a remote, and another image appeared beside it, my real signature, taken from my driver's license renewal and verified by a handwriting expert. The difference was stark, even to the untrained eye. The forged version was too careful, too deliberate, every letter drawn with hesitation. The real one had flow, rhythm, life. "Notice the curvature of the J," Mr. Goldstein pointed out, his tone professional but cutting. "In her real signature, it dips slightly to the left. In the forged versions, it hooks upward. These inconsistencies appear in all 22 forged documents." He flipped another page. "Even the notary seals were falsified. Our forensic analyst confirmed that the embossing patterns don't match the registered notary's stamp on file." I glanced toward my parents. My mother's face had lost all color. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, pretending not to hear. Then Mr. Goldstein paused, the kind of pause that feels like the silence before a thunderclap. "However," he said, "what you're about to see removes all doubt." He gestured toward the court technician, who dimmed the lights. The large screen flickered to life, displaying a grainy but clear video feed. The timestamp in the corner read from various dates, each one corresponding to a major withdrawal from the estate account. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. Then the image sharpened, and there they were, my parents, standing side by side at a bank counter, smiling politely at the teller as they filled out forms. My mother leaned in close, signing on the line where my name should have gone. My father nodded approvingly before handing over her ID, as if they'd done nothing wrong. The footage switched to another date, another branch, another withdrawal. Each time, the same thing. My parents, calm, composed, acting like they belonged there. I could hear gasps ripple through the courtroom. Someone whispered softly, "Oh my God." My stomach twisted as I watched. Every flick of the pen felt like a stab. Every smile on their faces was another betrayal replayed in front of strangers. When the video ended, the lights flickered back on. The judge sat completely still, her expression unreadable. My mother was crying silently now, tears sliding down her cheeks as she stared at the table. My father finally lowered his head, his mask of control cracking for the first time. Mr. Goldstein's voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, we submit these recordings, authenticated by the bank's security department, as irrefutable evidence of fraud, forgery, and theft." He turned slightly toward me, his tone softening. My client trusted her parents with everything. What they returned was deception. The judge leaned forward, folding her hands. "This court finds the evidence overwhelming." Her voice was firm, echoing across the chamber. "All funds in question will be restored to Ms. Harris, with interest. Furthermore, this court will impose civil penalties for fraud and recommend a criminal investigation for forgery." It was over, just like that. Months of fear, anger, and sleepless nights collapsed into that single, decisive moment. Mr. Goldstein turned to me and whispered, "You just got your justice." But as I sat there, staring at my parents, my mother silently weeping, my father stone-faced and defeated, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like mourning. The bailiff moved to collect the evidence, and the courtroom began to stir again. Chairs creaking, papers rustling, whispers rising. I barely noticed any of it. My gaze was locked on my parents. For the first time, my mother looked old to me, fragile, broken. My father, who once seemed larger than life, looked small. I wanted to feel satisfaction, but all I felt was the hollow ache of finality. Then, just as the judge prepared to adjourn, their attorney, Mr. Denton, stood up. "Your Honor," he said quickly, "before you proceed with sentencing recommendations, my clients would like to request a recess. They wish to discuss a possible resolution privately with Ms. Harris and her counsel." Mr. Goldstein frowned slightly, but nodded. The judge agreed to a short recess and left the bench. The room emptied slowly, leaving me standing beside Mr. Goldstein as my parents and their attorney approached. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father's jaw was set, his expression unreadable. Mr. Denton adjusted his tie and spoke softly. "They'd like to make an offer. Off the record." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Whatever this was, it wasn't an apology. My parents' attorney requested a recess, hinting they wanted to negotiate privately. They didn't want forgiveness. They wanted a deal. The judge had granted a 30-minute recess, and I barely had time to breathe before Mr. Denton approached. He gestured toward a small conference room down the hall. "My clients would like to speak with you privately," he said. "No press, no record, just family." I almost laughed at that word, family. But curiosity, or maybe closure, made me follow him. Mr. Goldstein came with me, standing silently by the door as I sat across from my parents at a narrow wooden table. My mother's mascara had smeared into thin gray streaks. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him, the lines on his face deepened by defeat. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Then my mother finally broke the silence. "Judith, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we're begging you. Please don't let them press criminal charges. We'll make things right. We'll repay what's left. Just drop it before this destroys us." I stared at her, the woman who once taught me how to braid my hair, now bargaining for mercy. "Repay what's left?" I repeated. "You mean the scraps after you spent my grandmother's life savings?" Her face crumpled. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought we could invest it, make it grow, and—" "Make it grow?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You forged my signature. You lied to me for a year. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." My father finally spoke, his tone still calm but hollow. "We gave you life, Judith. That money was part of the family legacy. You wouldn't even have it if not for us. We just wanted to keep it where it belonged, in the family." I looked him straight in the eye. "You mean in your pockets?" He leaned forward, voice hardening. "We earned the right to use it. We sacrificed for you your entire life. We deserve some comfort in our old age." It was almost surreal hearing him justify it so plainly, as if love were a debt I owed him, payable in silence. My mother reached across the table, her hands shaking. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. We're your parents. Families don't take each other to court." I pulled my hand back. Families also don't steal from each other. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall, counting down the minutes of what felt like the end of something sacred. I asked them one question, one that had been eating at me since this nightmare began. "Why did you do it?" My mother broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. "We were tired of struggling," she cried. "We wanted to enjoy life a little. After all the years of working and saving, we thought we deserved it." My father didn't even flinch. "We didn't think you'd notice," he said bluntly. "You've always been sentimental. We thought you'd be fine with us managing it. You're too emotional for money." That did it. The last thread of pity inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, my voice low but steady. "You didn't just steal my money. You stole Grandma's last act of love, the one thing she left to take care of me. And you twisted it into something ugly. That's not protection. That's greed." My mother sobbed harder, reaching for my hand again, but I stepped back. My father finally looked away, his shoulders sagging, the fight gone from his eyes. "I'm sorry you see it that way," he muttered. I turned to Mr. Goldstein. "We're done here." As I walked toward the door, my mother's voice cracked behind me. "Judith, please!" Don't ruin our lives. I paused just long enough to answer without looking back. You already ruined mine. We returned to the courtroom in silence. Mr. Goldstein gave a brief statement to the judge. My client declines any private settlement. We request that the court proceed with sentencing. The judge nodded. Very well. Her tone was calm but final. Given the evidence and the defendant's conduct, this court orders full repayment of the stolen funds with accrued interest. Additionally, the defendants will perform 200 hours of community service for fraud-related restitution. My parents didn't look at me as the bailiff approached. My mother's shoulders shook as she wept quietly, and my father stood rigid, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. As they were escorted from the courtroom, my father turned just before stepping through the door. His gaze met mine, proud no longer, just hollow. It was the first time I'd ever seen him defeated, and somehow it didn't feel triumphant. It felt tragic. Outside, Mr. Goldstein placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, he said softly. Justice isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about not losing yourself. I nodded, though the words barely sank in. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling both lighter and lonelier than I ever had. Weeks passed. The case was over, the media buzz died down, and my life slowly returned to something that resembled normal. I went back to work, started gardening again, even joined a local charity in my grandmother's honor. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I opened my mailbox and saw a letter from my bank. My stomach tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a simple statement: account deposit received, $312,482.16. Source, court-ordered restitution. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I should have felt relieved, victorious even, but instead, all I felt was silence. Weeks later, I received a letter from the bank stating a large sum had been deposited back into my account. I got my money back, but I lost something far more permanent. The day I went to the bank, the sky was overcast, heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. It felt fitting, a calm before a storm that never came. I walked up to the counter, clutching my ID, my hands trembling just slightly. The teller smiled politely and typed my account number into her computer. A moment later, she looked up and nodded. Yes, Ms. Harris, the restitution has cleared. Your account balance is $312,482.16. I stared at the screen for a long time, the numbers almost surreal. That money had once represented betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. Now it was just there. Static. When I left the bank, I sat in my car and watched raindrops begin to splatter across the windshield. I expected to feel joy or relief, something victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. The money was back, but the trust that had been stolen with it wasn't something any court could restore. Mr. Goldstein called later that afternoon to congratulate me. It's official, he said. The full restitution plus penalties have been transferred. You've won, Judith. I thanked him, but my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. Winning didn't feel like I thought it would. Justice, I realized, isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it's just quiet. That night, I sat at my dining table, the same place where this all began with that first letter, and spread out the old photographs I'd taken from my parents' house years ago. My grandmother, Agnes, smiling in her garden. Me, as a little girl, holding her hand. My parents, younger and full of pride. I studied their faces and tried to find the point where love had turned into entitlement. I couldn't. Maybe it had always been there, buried under control and expectation, waiting for a reason to surface. In the following weeks, I began to think about what to do with the money. Keeping it in my account felt wrong, like hoarding something that had caused so much pain. So I decided to use part of it to honor the one person who had loved me without condition. I contacted a local university and set up the Agnes Fairchild Memorial Scholarship, a fund for women over 50 returning to college. Grandma always believed in second chances, in reinvention, no matter your age. When I signed the paperwork, I felt her presence beside me, warm, approving, proud. The first check I wrote from that fund felt like the first genuine act of healing. As for my parents, they left town quietly not long after the case closed, sold the house, closed their business accounts, and disappeared to another state. I didn't ask where. I didn't want to know. Occasionally, a distant relative mentions they're doing fine, or that my mother still cries when my name comes up. But neither of them has ever reached out. Sometimes I miss them, not the thieves they became, but the parents I thought I had, the ones who tucked me in, who stood in the crowd at my graduation, who smiled in family photos before greed took root. Grief has a strange way of circling back. It doesn't care whether you lost someone to death or choice. The ache feels the same. But there's one person who stayed by my side through all of it. Ruth. My sister and I talk almost every day now. We used to be distant, polite, out of obligation. But after the trial, something shifted. We realized that family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up when everything else falls apart. Ruth came to visit one weekend in the spring. We planted roses in my backyard. Red ones, my grandmother's favorite. When we finished, she hugged me and said, "You finally look like yourself again." Maybe she was right. I wasn't the same woman who had once believed that love automatically meant trust. I was older now. Scarred, yes, but stronger for it. I learned that trust, once broken, doesn't heal through court orders. It heals through boundaries, through choosing yourself even when it hurts. I began rebuilding my life in small ways. I joined a community art class. I started volunteering at a senior center. I laughed again, not because life was perfect, but because it was mine. Every decision, every quiet morning, every late night moment of peace. They belong to me now. One evening, as I stood in the garden watching the sunset, I thought about my grandmother again. I imagined her voice, calm and certain, saying what she always did when life got hard. "Judith, remember who you are." For the first time in years, I could answer her. I do now. The inheritance she left me was never about money. It was a gift of independence, one I had to lose everything else to truly understand. That night, I wrote the final check to complete the scholarship fund. I signed my name, my real signature, the one they could never fake, and smiled. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about reclaiming me. I may have lost my parents, but I gained something priceless. The courage to never let anyone write my story but me. In the end, I realized justice doesn't always mean getting even. Sometimes it means finally letting go. The money was returned, but the price was peace, trust, and family. I built a new life on truth, not inheritance, and that became my real wealth. Maybe love without honesty isn't love at all. It's control dressed as care. But tell me, if the people who raised you betrayed you for money, would you ever forgive them? If this story made you pause for a moment, maybe it's because you've seen what grief. Some lessons in life come with tears, others with truth, and both deserve to be heard. Keep supporting stories that remind us what family, trust, and strength truly mean. Share your thoughts below, and stay with me for more real stories that cut deep.